Alan Bleiweiss is, by far, the most famous for his brutally honest SEO audits. When I told my friends about this video, they went on like, oh yeah, he's the best in the niche. I've heard of him like 10 years ago, but actually, Alan started 28 years ago and almost with internet itself or World Wide Web itself, and has been in SEO 23 years. Alan's grandparents come from Ukraine, which is especially important for me right now, and his fiancée as well. Alan has been doing SEO audits for 15 years now. Alan, how did you avoid burning out?
Burning out is a real challenge in our industry. And for me, there have been times where I've burned out. I haven't avoided it entirely. What I believe is important is to always expand our knowledge and opportunities for exploring new ways to apply our skills and our knowledge. So that's how my career evolved. I started out building websites, and then I managed the building of websites. Uh, I got into SEO at one point and was doing SEO. Then I managed a team of SEO professionals, and then I became an audit consultant. So over many years, I've shifted my participation in our industry based on where I felt pulled to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I also want to present, before we proceed to anything else, I want to present our sponsor because I want to translate this video into Ukrainian. I need some resources for that, and it takes time and localization. So I had SEO Domains kindly agree to sponsor this show and everything around it. And a few words about SEO Domains. They are by far the largest provider of age-expired domains worldwide, and they cover almost every country from US, UK to Ukraine as well, and India and Japan. And they have like tens of thousands of domains, and there are some good niche matches for 301 redirects and new money sites and everything else. If you are the first time customer, you can get 15% discount of your first order with a coupon code SEOBaza15. Alan, your audits, from what I've read in Facebook and in the comments of other people who worked with you, and from what I've heard from other people who tried to order something or ordered something, they say they are very comprehensive. So they are really, really huge, and they encompass lots of information from everything. So do you think and do you find a value in making very big audit?
I think it's important to present the information that matters most to the site owner or your client or your employer, and that at a certain point, there's too much information being given, or conversely, not enough important information. So sometimes audits are really short from what I've seen from others, and they lack depth in terms of their ability to properly help. So for me, I want to make sure that I empower my clients with enough knowledge to make a positive difference, but I don't want to overwhelm them, because if you throw too much at them, they become lost and then they don't move anywhere. They don't make any decisions because they don't know what to start with. They think it's overwhelmingly too much and that they'll never finish getting the work done. For me, my audit documents will typically go anywhere from 35 pages to 70 or 80 pages in the extreme. That's it, right? So in the case of 80 pages, that was a situation where not only did the site owner have to completely rebuild their entire website from scratch, but they had to change everything that they had previously done and how they had been working on their own site and I split it into two documents. The first one was, here's everything that you were doing incorrectly and why it was a problem. And here's a step-by-step document on how to rebuild from the bottom up so that you avoid those mistakes in the future. That's the biggest audit I've ever delivered, was about 80 pages.
It sounds enormous. Do you think there might be a good practice to make a audit in several parts and deliver them one by one so that the client implements something and then you deliver another part so that they implement another thing?
Several clients have wanted me to do that for them over the years. However, I very rarely go about my work that way, and here's why. Until I've completed the audit, I don't know what the highest priorities of work are. Sure, I might be able to go in and right away, if I see that the page speeds are really bad, and when I talk about page speeds, I'm not just talking about Core Web Vitals, CWV. Core Web Vitals are not the only aspect of page speed that matters. But if I do an audit and I see that page speed issues are really severe, from that perspective, yes, I know they will need to be worked on. So I could choose to send them the page speed tasks first. The problem with that is if I find there's architecture weakness or severe code problems because they've got other issues in their code, if I tell them go work on the speed before I identify those other technical issues, it could cause a situation where they make changes that they'll end up having to undo to fix the other code problems. So I don't want to give them it piece by piece tasks. I want to do all of my work first, present the document in one complete handoff, and then from there, we can split it apart and talk about prioritization once I know all of the things that need to be done at the highest level.
What do you think should be included into audit? And another important question right here, what should not be included into audit?
It depends. That's a reality. Okay. There are strategic audits and there are tactical audits. I mostly do strategic audits. That's the highest level view of a website's presence in the organic ecosystem. And I am looking for the most important weaknesses and the most impactful resolution or fixes that I can recommend at that point. And that's why quite often clients will hire me for that initial strategic audit. They'll do the work, and it could take 6 months or more, depending on how much change I call for. After that, they'll start seeing improvement, and they come back to me and they say, okay, let's go further. Then at that point, I will go further. I'll dig deeper, right? But again,
Right.
I don't want to overwhelm my clients. I need to give them what's most important today, now. And then there's always going to be more work that can be done. There will always be more work. This is SEO.
I've looked through your audit template and some checklists, and you have lots of rows devoted to topics, lots about that. What do you mean by that, and how do you check that?
In 2011, there was a conference in Seattle, SMX Advanced, and I was one of the speakers there. And during that conference, Stephen Spencer from Bing mentioned the fact that Bing and Google were collaborating on a new initiative related to understanding human language. And a growth that came out of that on Google's side was Panda. Okay, so the big Panda focus that began around 2011, I had identified in the weeks leading into that both Google and Bing were moving away from pure keywords into topical focus. So it's topics, subjects, right? That was 12, 13 years ago. Since then, Google and Bing have gotten to a point where topical understanding is essentially the foundation to all of SEO. So a keyword is just one word. A phrase might be 2, 3, or 5 words. A topic can incorporate hundreds or thousands of keyword phrases. I want to look at how well a website communicates the most important topics, and within that, the highest value phrases for that topic. And then after that, what about subtopics? What about digging deeper in communication with your site visitors about a given topic, right? In e-commerce, it's category, subcategory, subcategory, right? So there's main topic, subtopic, subtopic. It's the exact same thing with informational content. Not everything is at the top. You can't claim that every keyword phrase is equally important, so you have to prioritize them. And this is where you start organizing by subtopic. I look at how well a website executes all of that conveyance and distribution of knowledge, and whether or not there's dilution because they're covering too many different topics in one area of a website, for example, or where they don't go deep enough and they're too much on the surface. Those are the kind of things I look at when I talk about topics.
How do you distinguish if it's enough or if it's too long or if it's not enough?
You spend 28 years working in your industry, so you know what's enough and what's not. Honestly, I think what happens is people fail to understand that the purpose of SEO is to truly optimize. If I want to optimize a website, the amount of content you need will always turn out to be whatever amount of content is necessary to answer all of the important questions that all of the different types of people who come to your website that you're trying to reach have. So you need to know the subject matter of the business. You need to know for this particular topic set, there might be 10, 20, 50, 100 different questions that people ask when they're considering that product or that service, right? That's the way to get to know how much content to have. You need to understand how to evaluate that process. What are the important questions? What questions do I not know matter? What questions are similar enough that I can consolidate them into one page of more depth? All of that is part of it.
Do you include entity optimization techniques or recommendations into your audit, or do you think they are just a part of topic? So you have this
Entity-based.
list, for example, of the phrases, important phrases or queries that you're optimizing for, and you make some canonical, some important, prominent queries, a list of them to include at the top. Do you use the entities or that can be part of the query and extract it from the query and optimize for it as well? Its attributes, its relationship to other entities.
Yeah, so semantically speaking, for me, entities are really topics. Entities is just a different word for a type of topic, okay? So my company, my business is an entity, right? So what is the topic of my business? Search engine optimization consulting is the topic for that entity. So it all gets tied in because I focus on the human language approach that consumers use, and I don't get caught up in the overly technical wording our industry produces. I understand the concept of entities in SEO, and for me, it's about topics, not entities, because topics is more clarified in what the purpose and needs are.
Why do you think SEO audit should check conversions? Like actually the person who makes SEO audit should check conversions and bear that in mind. If you think like that,
Conversion,
uh,
yeah,
I've got that
yeah.
impression from your audits.
Conversions are the whole purpose of SEO. You could get all the traffic you want, but if nobody's buying, it doesn't matter, right? So for me, when I speak to a chief financial officer at a Fortune 500 corporation, or I speak with a chief operating officer at Walt Disney, for example, is one of my clients, they don't care about the technical words and the technical terms and all of the details at the granular level. They care about conversions. How much money did we make because of this work? Right?
Right.
And Google has a purpose to make sure that they're providing the best answers to the searcher, and the best answers to searchers who are going to spend money is conversions. So we need to look at conversions, and we need to understand that we need to bring more qualified visits to the website so that we could potentially increase conversions because we're more accurately targeting the ideal market. But on the website itself, we need to make sure that we don't have any friction or barriers to conversion access in regards to whatever SEO we're doing. Conversions are about the bottom line, the end result. So they absolutely matter.
I've seen that you are checking internal links naturally in your audits. How do you do that? Especially for a big website, it's quite a challenge.
Yeah. The larger the website, the more challenging a lot of our work becomes. And for me, a large website has 250,000 pages at a minimum. I've audited websites with 400 million pages. You can't look at every page on a website at that scale. You cannot test every page at that scale. You cannot crawl and properly look at the data for every aspect of SEO at that scale. Yes, you can use a really powerful and robust crawler if you want to crawl every page. However, as the audit professional, you cannot devote enough time to looking at every page. So what do? The first thing is you go into Google Search Console and you export their report on internal links. They list the 1,000 most linked pages on a website. So that report alone will show you whether your internal linking is pointing most often to your own most important pages. Google Search Console, internal link report, that knowledge is there. I also crawl a website and I will look at other data. However, the best way to understand internal links is to identify the key sections of a website where each section might look the same or might look slightly different, but where they're separate sections. And I look at the navigation in that section through a sampling of pages. The single biggest weakness I see from an internal linking perspective over and over again is that people do not have proper internal navigation once you're inside an individual section of a website. So, for example, I'll use e-commerce again because it's a great example, but this applies to information and knowledge sites as well. If I go to a category of products on a website, I expect to see subcategory links either at the top of the page or on the side of the page. And in addition to that, I expect to see filter options. So I can say, show me the price range or sort it by highest to lowest. This is section-specific navigation for e-commerce. When I go to an information website, if you tell me you've got 1,000 pages in one category, do not force me to click next, 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 or previous, previous, previous to discover all of the pages in that one section. Give me additional navigation that's specific to that section alone, either at the top of the page below the main navigation or on the sidebar, so I can refine my access based on what I know I'm looking for. That's the biggest weakness for internal linking. But I also look at links in content as well because they matter, right? Those are the ways, the overall ways I look at internal linking.
Do you also filter the anchors for each page, like when the site is not so big or when you make it in bunches or in clusters? Do you
Anchor
think it is
text
important, the internal link diversity anchor, like if the
yeah.
anchors for internal links are diversified in terms when they are content?
It's natural for somebody who does not know anything about SEO on their own website to always use the same text when they're referring to a particular page or section on their own website. We need to understand that SEO is also about understanding what is a natural pattern and what's an artificial pattern. And for a site owner who does not know anything about SEO, using the same anchor text is natural page after page on that website. It's artificial when we go to other websites that link back to us and they all use the same anchor text. That's artificial because if I have 100 people, 100 different websites that are all linking to me, in nature, not all 100 of them are going to use the same words when they personally are talking about the same topic. So it's unnatural to see the same anchor text over and over again for inbound links. It's not unnatural to see the repetition within a website itself. That does not mean that we don't need to be concerned about over-optimization. We do need to be aware of that and be concerned about it. However, when it comes to the anchor text itself, if a website uses the same exact words every time internally, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, because there's a very popular theory that when you use the same anchor more than thrice in context, not in navigation, not in the footer, not anywhere else, then Google treats it like the navigational link, not context link.
The answer to that is it depends whether that happens or not. That happens mostly when you're not properly placing those internal links in unique enough content because Google does not just look at the anchor text for relevance or topical refinement, they look at all of the text around the anchor text for that relevance connection. That's more important than the actual one or two words you use for the hot link itself. What is the overall uniqueness of this paragraph compared to where I put the same link somewhere else on this page or on another page?
You've mentioned core web vitals and that they are part of the speed factors that you are checking. How much influence does the speed have in your opinion?
Speed has a lot more impact than most people are willing to accept at this point in the SEO community, because too many people mistakenly came to believe that core web vitals is the only aspect of speed that matters. Google has a completely separate algorithm dedicated to page experience, and page experience algorithm doesn't just include speed factors, it includes other usability factors as well. However, page speed is part of that. So if you have a page where your core web vitals look really good, but your largest contentful paint as one other signal is 15 seconds, and if that individual element takes 15 seconds, but your rendering sequence is designed so that a human cannot even use the page until that largest content is delivered, then a human being cannot even interact with your site for 15 seconds. And I guarantee you that causes weakness in your SEO. And if it happens too often, you're going to suffer as a result. Now, you may not see your suffering if you see you're highly ranked for that page. However, I guarantee you at least some of your visitors are leaving before they even get the opportunity to decide to become a client or customer. So if you only think about SEO and if you only get stuck on core web vitals, you're ignoring what's more important, and that's usability, regardless of how that visitor came to your site. Also, everything that Google does is continually driving to more accurately emulate usability. So get this message now. Speed matters more than most people are willing to accept in this industry. I have helped websites recover from lost rankings doing nothing else but improving page speed. Now, that doesn't mean that page speed is the most important thing or the most important need for any one website. And it does not mean that if you change and improve your page speeds, you're also going to see improvements in your traffic. However, it's so important that it's irresponsible to ignore or to take shortcuts with.
Maybe you've heard this news that Google has retracted the core web vitals and page experience from the ranking system, from their documentation.
Google is constantly changing how they go about the business of communicating to site owners and communicating to the search industry what's important. The concept that Google is removing mention of any given aspect of what we have come to believe is important to SEO does not mean that thing is no longer important. It only means that Google is trying to find better ways to get better search results for their visitors in a world that now involves many algorithms and where their documentation has to catch up with the changes they make internally. The most important thing to take away from this concept is, for this particular aspect of what we were doing, where we believed we needed to do it for SEO, even if Google does not mention it specifically today, is it still important for usability? And if it's still important for usability, then we have no right to think, well, Google is not using it in their documentation anymore, so I don't have to bother. That's irresponsible business practices. And we always get more information eventually to find out what Google was thinking when they do something. So if there's something going on today or this week or this month where they've made changes to documentation, yeah, it's fun to read it and it's important to pay attention. However, we cannot allow that to dictate the work we do.
So they are also removing the mobile friendliness, I think it's called this way, tool where you can see how your page looks on mobile. And some of us tried it to get the code of the third-party sites that they are actually delivering to Google and all these kind of things. But now they are removing the tool, they are removing it from Search Console, and they are removing the API. How will we now check if our page is mobile friendly?
The first rule is to do the thing that most people in SEO never do. If you go to the W3C testing tool set, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute, you will be able to properly test the code on your web pages. So the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, is the worldwide organization that has come up with the actual HTML language as it has evolved over the years. Okay? And today, even if you use WordPress or you use Shopify or any one of a dozen different programming languages to build your website, the output still ends up needing to be HTML. Okay? And you can reference scripts, JavaScript, in between the HTML at the code level. But if you go to the W3 testing tools, test your web pages with that, because that is going to be where you will get revealed, oh, look, this particular functionality is causing problems for web accessibility. And if you know enough about web accessibility on mobile devices, you'll know from that, that's a problem for mobile. That's the first thing I recommend. From there are tools that exist that allow you to look at your web pages in a simulated mobile environment. There are weaknesses and there are flaws to that. However, it's another thing I do because with my own eyes, I can see if a page is functional the way I need it to be for mobile. Another technique is using a tool called the Wave testing tool, WAVE. It's a browser plugin that I have. And the Wave testing tool tests for web accessibility. It's not 100% complete. It's not 100% accurate. However, it will reveal more potential problems for web accessibility, some of which will be mobile related. From there, use Google PageSpeed Insights or Google Lighthouse, because their reports also include information about mobile functionality. Don't just rely on Google Search Console for all of your needs. That was never enough. It was never enough. It will never be enough. Use multiple tools to get the answers you need.
when you've checked everything and you've got these specific problems of a web page or website or whatever, how do you prioritize those tasks? How do you decide this one is important, this one is less important, this is good to have, this is not important at all?
It depends. If I have done an audit and I find there are 5 major problems on the website: page speed, internal navigation, topical dilution, right? If I come up with that list, not every client's going to be able to work on all of that at once because they have limited resources. So we need to talk about how do you decide what do you do first? And the answer is technical issues are always best as the first set of priorities because one, they should only be a one-time fix at the code level. Two, most of the time, you don't have to work on every page to fix your code. They're template based. So you might only have 4 or 5 templates for your entire website. And if you fix the code, there's only 4 or 5 templates to work on. You can be done with it. And next, the reason I always recommend that be one of the first things that you do is because it will benefit all of your site visitors, not just SEO. So get rid of your technical problems. Be done with those. Then, as more time is needed for deeper research for topical fixes, or where I want you to review 1,000 blog posts to determine which ones of those should be moved into evergreen page status outside the blog, that's more time consuming. That's going to take a lot more time. Ideally, you can have one person or 2 people working on technical things and 1 or 2 or 3 people working on topic-related needs. So it depends on how many people you have working on the project. These all matter.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen how you actually track the results, but maybe you want to explain a bit more. How do you measure the results during the follow up that I think you do?
Well, the first thing that I do is I tell clients, when you go to make these changes, do them on a staging server or a development server, and then have me look at that work before you go live with it. That's how I observe the results in my ideal scenario. Because I know if they're going to do the work has been done properly. That's the most important result I care about before we start seeing what happened to rankings or conversions. Did they do the work properly? Too many clients get my audit, come back to me 6 months later and say, we did the work, but we're not getting increased ranking. So I say, did you really do the work or did you only do half of it? That's the results I care about first. Once I get past that, I want to monitor site traffic and I want to monitor rankings in the broadest concept possible. There's no value at looking at rankings every single day. There's no value in looking at 80,000 keywords for their individual rankings. It's a waste of time. What's more important is to look at the general trend of ranking fluctuation in Google Search Console. Use Google Search Console's reports to look at what your traffic has been for the last 30 days, the last 60, the last 90, the last 7 days. Compare date ranges for specific keyword phrase groups. But don't get caught up in thinking for this one phrase, we didn't move up in rankings, so it's a failure. I have clients who never got the top position for their most important phrases, but where we focused on that goal, and as a result of that goal, they got lift all around it for the longer tail phrases. That resulted in a 200% income growth So it didn't even matter that their competitors kept the number one phrase top position. We didn't even care. All of this matters when we're thinking about what results to look at. We need to understand why we're looking at them and what information we can get from them to better understand what's happening.
Do you check backlinks? Do you think they are a very essential part of the audit? Should be an ordinary audit including them?
Yes, I absolutely do, but it depends. Some clients some clients have really good in-house SEO teams, and they're on top of the backlink observation and disavow tasking as needed. However, for most clients, I look at backlinks because negative SEO is still real. Negative SEO to this day still hurts websites. And negative SEO still to this day is mostly artificial link creation. Also, to this day, people sell backlinks pretending they're the most important way to get actual rankings. And to this day, I say, if you're buying and selling backlinks, you're screwing over the people who own those websites, those business owners. I don't care if you've gotten away with it until now. More likely than not, the artificial links you're buying have no impact at all, so you're just making the site owner pay money for nothing, okay? Because for the most part, Google ignores all of that garbage. However, Google's imperfect. We know this. And we know that artificial links can sometimes improve rankings. The issue becomes, are you willing to risk having your site end up buried in Google where you're not even getting a notice because they did not make a manual action? So Google Search Console is not going to tell you you got penalized for the links. Google one day is just going to drop your rankings. And then for the next 6 months to a year, every major update they do, your rankings are going to fall further. I have been hired to do audits for more websites where that's what's going on in the last 3 years than I did all of the 9 or 10 years that I've been, however many years I've been doing audits combined. Just in the last 3 years. People need to realize that buying backlinks is a toxic, dangerous game, and every year Google's going to get stricter and stricter. And that's why people come to me and they're saying, we're screwed. But here's a problem. The moment Google catches you doing that, even if you've gotten away with it for 10 years, the moment they catch you and you start losing rankings, you can't just disavow links and automatically have your rankings bounce back either, because Google's system now is much more sophisticated. Yes, disavowing is critical when done properly, and sometimes when you disavow, you will start to see your rankings improve. But to get back to the highest level that you used to be at, more often than ever before, now you need to go about the work of proving in a new way that you're an authority, that you're experts, that you are not artificially trying to manipulate Google. So that means new work needs to be done to re-earn that trust. I absolutely look at backlinks, and people need to wake up to the reality.
How do you gain authority without links?
I've helped many websites rank at the top of their industry with almost no links. But where
Maybe
the
they
links
have
that
PBNs. PBNs.
where the links come from is proper public relations that does not involve SEO attitudes. Proper public relations will get you the visibility and the community recognition that you need for off-site confirmation that you're an authoritative presence. So one good link that's done properly is worth 1,000 garbage links. One link replaces 1,000. However, those links are very difficult. So what do? You make sure that your web presence is the best web presence in your industry. You make sure you're answering all of the important questions that I talked about earlier, but not only are you answering all of the important questions, you're doing so in a way that's better than your competitors. You're making your content more properly organized for more intuitive human access, which means section level navigation is part of it. Your URL hierarchy is reflective of your navigational drop-down process. Your pages are properly structured for ease of reading. So if you have a long page, you have a table of contents at the top. All of these and many more factors go into proving that your site is stronger than your competitors. And when you do that, if the content that you write is written by true experts in your industry, and you provide proper citation for what you say in your own content, as just one primary example, you can absolutely prove authority, expertise, without having to get artificial backlinks. I have clients that I optimized personally 10, 12, and 15 years ago that are still ranking in the top of their rankings with only a little bit of work since then and with little inbound link effort, because it doesn't come down to, who has more backlinks. If you actually deliver the most valuable content, that's what matters.
And then comes GPT chat or ChatGPT, GPT-4, other models, steal your content instead, training on that and giving it as their own, and you gain nothing. No?
Artificial intelligence and ChatGPT are a myth, are a lie. They are not a threat to real professionals in the SEO industry because, first of all, AI is really flawed right now, and most of the data that AI relies upon is very old and outdated. But also because it's impossible to emulate human emotion and the way the human mind operates. AI cannot convey at the human level for everything. Yes, there are very, very dry, boring topics that AI is already really good at communicating. However, if you're trying to get a human being to buy your medical life-saving products, if you think you can rely on AI to talk to their emotional needs, you're mistaken. So somebody like me is going to come around, and I'm going to work with content professionals who are not just SEOs that started writing content, but people who are communications majors in college, or people for English-speaking sites who got a college degree in English, or people who are fluent in Ukrainian, if it's a Ukrainian website, right? Take the human mind that knows how to communicate in order to evoke emotional response from the audience and add into that knowledge about that business when you communicate. When you do that, you will always be able to outperform AI for the overwhelming majority of needs that the SEO industry will ever have.
Can you recommend some tools that are maybe not as widely known, but they are very important or helpful when you are doing an audit?
Yes, the W3C HTML testing tools is the number one recommendation I have. Okay? The W3C NU new HTML checker is the one I use the most. When you submit a page in that, it'll give you the errors and it'll list all of the errors it found on that page and all of the warnings. It'll show you if they're style sheet based errors or if they're script based errors or pure HTML based errors. That's the number one tool that most people don't think about or understand the value of. I will also say that not enough people are using webpagetest.org. I have a problem with their current version because of usability issues. But still to this day, separate from Google Lighthouse or the Google PageSpeed Insights, webpagetest.org is going to allow you to emulate testing. Oh, you want to see mobile usability? Use the webpagetest.org system and the advanced settings and emulate a mobile device. Test your page in that so you can see from their perspective what your page speeds are. The reason I like to use that as well, and not enough people do it, is unlike PageSpeed Insights or Google Lighthouse, webpagetest.org breaks down the page's individual assets and how long it took to request each script or each image or each code block, how long it took to process it, how long it took to actually execute the script and complete the download. It also shows you the render sequence. And too many site owners put too many assets in the code before rendering can begin. So they're pulling JavaScript files that have nothing to do with getting a person to use the page. They're extra, but they'll put those scripts in before rendering can be completed. It slows the rendering sequence, right? Webpagetest.org shows you that rendering sequence so you can fix things that are a problem with that. That's another great example.
Maybe you can share what are the costs usually involved when performing an audit.
The costs involved are time and resources. Somebody who's doing an audit who does not have experience doing a lot of audits, it might take that person 40 hours to do that audit properly if they're going to try and do an audit the way I do. Okay? Now, it might take me 10 hours to do that same audit. But that newcomer first starting out needs to understand for them, the cost is time. Yes? So how much they charge needs to reflect the fact that it's going to take them as much time as it will take them. However, they cannot charge as much per hour as somebody like me charges because we can get more done in 1 hour than they can get done, right? So there's a difficult balance in finding out how much do you charge. But then there's tools that are involved, right? So if I'm not just relying on Google Search Console, I want Screaming Frog so I can crawl the website. But if it's 150,000 or 500,000 or 5 million pages, I don't just want to rely on Screaming Frog. I might need to put Screaming Frog on the cloud so that I don't overwhelm my laptop when I'm running a crawl on 150,000 pages. So there's expense with the cloud-based crawl. Or a different crawling tool might have a cost I might need to pay. If I'm using Ahrefs to do an inbound link gap analysis, Ahrefs has a cost, right? So all the different tools that exist, I have so many different tools. I mean, I literally have 50 or 60 different tools that I use at any given time. I might only use 5 or 10 or 15 of them, but for different sites, I have other tools that I might need. And the other factor is if I need to have a test done that I myself don't know how to do, I might need to hire somebody else to do that test for me. So there's potentially other costs with that as well.
Yeah, that's nice. May I also ask about logs? Do you check logs often?
At my point in my journey, I have not needed to dive into the log files in a couple of years. For me, the only time a person needs to look at log files is if there is some really severely flawed technical problem that cannot be properly identified with other tools, or if there's potentially a case where the site has been hacked or hijacked. Log files matter in a narrow set of circumstances. However, for the majority of sites out there, log files do not need to be looked at anymore. Tools do a good enough job overall that we don't need to look at the log files. But yeah, once in a while, a situation requires it because it depends.
Okay, nice. Thank you so much. Where can people find you? Or where can they contact you if you are open to that?
Well, my website, alanbleiweiss.com. Uh, that's pretty much it these days. I rarely go to LinkedIn. I don't. Yeah, I started going to LinkedIn more lately, but I don't go often enough. So if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I'm not going to see it. I'm no longer on Twitter because I got banned from Twitter twice, fighting
Why?
fascists, fighting fascists,
Uh,
including Moscow, Katsaps, and American fascists.
oh my.
I got banned. I got banned from Twitter because I got into fights with fascists. That's reality. I'm on Facebook. However, I do not just connect with anybody randomly on Facebook. I prefer to have a connection that's a mutual connection where we can begin to get to know each other because of something like that. And then I'll consider adding you to my friends list on Facebook.
Are you going to conferences a lot these days or networking events or something like that?
I have not been able to get to conferences since the pandemic. The pandemic just threw me off for a loop. My health needs required it for a while as well because it was too much for my health. My health has improved, thank God, very well. I don't know that I want to be speaking at conferences anymore because I would prefer people who are not white men be given more speaking opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
And Dziękuję wam. Dziękuję wam. I am
Uh,
so grateful.
I'm
So
so
grateful.
grateful for you. Yeah, thank you so much.
I'll let you take care of yourself.
Yes, you too.